In this chapter, we will learn how to create layered materials in Keyshot. We will build a rust material and a dirt material, and then layer it onto our base metal using our extracted alpha masks from ZBrush and Knald. As you can see in our amulet, we have what looks almost like this kind of orange reddish colored rust. We're going to be making that as a material that is layered on top of the metal. And we also have another darker dirt that you see up here at the corner. I'll kind of zoom in on here. Imagine this being like mud or some other type of dirty type of material that got splattered on top. So we're going to be making that rust and then this dirt on top. And let's get started. So we're back in Keyshot, and first thing I'm going to show you is our material graph. There's a pretty convenient button up here. If you click this, Align Nodes and Work Area, this just cleans up your organization because things can get really messy once you get a lot of layered materials in here. And I'm just going to move everything up here a bit because we're going to need more space for the rust and dirt materials we're making. So the first one I think we should make is our rust material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come over here to our materials tab and come to paint. Let's just pick any of these, maybe this paint gloss right here. Doesn't really matter, you can choose whichever one you want. I'm going to press C on my keyboard. I'm going to zoom in here a bit too so we can see this a little closer. Pressing C so that this will activate this onto my model. Oh, sorry, I have this paused. Here we go. So you can see it's doing what you would think is a glossy paint. It's a little bit reflective here on the edges, and it looks nice, but we don't want paint, we want rust. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click this paint node. Let's change the node name to rust. And let's turn the roughness up to like a 0.6 because we want to remove the highlights. Now, if you guys remember, that means that the reflection is blurring out. It's not like a shiny reflection anymore. Next thing I want us to do is find a map that's within the texture section over here. This should be included in your version of Keyshot. Just find the one that says rusted and drag that into your scene. Sometimes it does what you saw right here where it'll automatically reorganize stuff. Don't worry about that. Let's click this button again. And here we have our paint. Let's just zoom in on that. So I'm going to press C on my keyboard. And now we can kind of see the rust that we have on here. As you remember, as always, anytime you bring in a texture map, it's going to go to mapping type box. I'm going to change this to UV. Honestly, it doesn't really matter on this one. You could have kept it either way, but I just want to be consistent, so I'm keeping it UV. I think this scale is fine for the width and height, so let's just keep that. And let's plug that into our paint node, and then we're going to press C on the paint node, and now we have that kind of combined in there. And that does feel a little bit rusty, so that's nice. Let's go ahead and give this a bump. We're going to duplicate this by right-clicking and then duplicate. Let's drag that into the bump node. Double-click this to highlight it. Come down here. As you remember the bump height, let's just change this to something like 0.2. Now you can see there's a little bit of bump here, but not too much, which is what we want. Next thing that we need to do is we need to be able to blend this rust with our metal. So we're going to grab one of those texture maps that we exported, or alpha maps from ZBrush or Knald. We're going to plug it into this opacity slot. So go wherever you save those. I think mine's in the masks section. Here's dirt from Knald and dirt from ZBrush. I'm just going to grab this dirt from ZBrush one and drag it right into our material graph. And let's plug this into the opacity and let's see what happens. So right away you'll see that it starts to rip out things here, and that's because technically it's doing what it should be doing. It's basically removing anything that is within the, I believe, black values of the map. So let's grab this, we'll press C again. Actually, it's the invert. So anything that's white in here is going to be disappearing. Think of that as like a magic eraser when it's plugged into this opacity. So let's click this again, opacity up here. And now you can see we just have that dirt that's sitting in certain areas. The thing is it looks like it's sitting on top. So I think we need to actually invert this mask. So let's come over here, right click, utilities, color invert. We'll plug this in here into the source, and then we'll plug this into the opacity. There we go. That's what we need. Cool. So now we have basically our rust material, and let's layer this on top of our metal texture. I'm going to click this again to reorganize things. And now we have two separate materials. We have our rust material and we have our metal material. Now if we take this and we click and drag it into any of the open sections right here, you'll notice that it creates a section called Label 1. So Label 1, basically this means that you have a material sitting on top of the metal. And now you can see what's happening. It's blending perfectly based on that really nice dirt mask that we created. And we have something that's looking pretty awesome already. So we have a very kind of rusty looking amulet. This looks great already. On the back, you can see it's working pretty nicely too. We'd have to rotate that light to see it in better detail. But just like that, it's really easy to make these blended materials in Keyshot. I love using this. So the next part that we need to do is to create those little black dirt marks that you'll remember that we had a second ago. So more like this type of stuff. That's what we're going to be making next in Keyshot. So we need to make another layered material. Before we do that, if you're watching from YouTube, go to my ArtStation page. If you remember artstation.com, Seth Thompson, click on the amulet, and then just go down through here. I think if you go way to the bottom, there's some different maps. So see this one, an inverted dirt mask to be used for mixing between materials during the Keyshot portion of the tutorial. Just take that, right click it, save image as, or click this little button down here, and we're going to be using that in a minute. And if you're following along from the purchase tutorial, within the folders section, you should be able to find it under images, texture maps, PSDs, and then here in the root, there should be one called mask dirt spots. So let's open up our material graph again. We're going to minimize this a bit. And let's drag that mask dirt spots mask in here. And we'll be using that in just a minute, not quite yet. Well, actually we can use that. So let's zoom in on this. We're going to select that node. Let's press C. And I want to show you that this is actually showing up on our model. Now, as always, the mapping type is on box. This one we definitely want to change to our UVs because what's happening with that box mapping, it's not going to have a consistent dirt as it tries to remap along these different edges. So come over here, change out the UV again. Now we have something that works consistently across the shapes with their nice relaxed UVs. I think right now this is just a bit large, so let's change our tiling to maybe a 0.5. And this may be a little bit aggressive. Let's change this to maybe a 0.75. I think this will be fine. This is going to make our object really, really dirty. That's okay. I think what I'd recommend is after you're done, you may want to go through and actually remove some of the dirt in Photoshop so it's not going to be so overpowering. But let's just do this because we've got it started. So for this darker dirt, we're once again going to use that paint material. So let's right click that, duplicate. This time we're going to be plugging that map we just saved into the opacity. And we can use that same texture map again. Let's duplicate that. Plug that, well, we'd plug it into the color, but what we want to do is we don't want to have the exact same kind of orange color going on that looks like the rust. So on this one, let's right click. Let's say utilities and color adjust. Let's drag this in here and then this one into here. So pressing C on the color adjust node, you can see it's got the original default colors. And over here, let's just turn the saturation down some. Now it's a little bit more brown. I think we can go more. Maybe let's make the value a little bit darker. And I think we can even go down further with the saturation. All right, so this to me feels just kind of like a dirt. It doesn't feel as much like rust. Let's go back to the texture map. I think just so it doesn't match perfectly with the rust underneath, it's good for us to change the tiling. So let's maybe make this, we'll make this bigger. That's a little bit too big. Let's say 1.5. I think that'll work. Just reorganizing this stuff a little bit. And let's right click, duplicate that texture map, and we will drag this one into our bump so that we have a bump working. Let's just see what this looks like from our rust. Real quick, I'm going to disable this. Okay, so you can see the bump that's working right here. That actually looks pretty good, even with the bump height at 1, but that's probably a little overkill, so let's change it to 0.5. Something like that's probably going to work nicely. I'm going to re-enable that opacity. And now you can see it's working with those areas and masking out onto the object. Next thing to do is let's layer that in on top of our metal. Once again, we're going to click this node here and just drag anywhere into this section. Let's do plus. And now it's actually on top of our metal. So let's go to the metal node and we'll press C. Now you can see that it's nicely in our render, sitting right on top of our metal. But I think we can enhance this even more. So you can see right here, the darkness is coming in. The problem is, just imagine if this was mud or something that landed on top of here, we'd probably want the edges popping a little bit as well, but we still want to retain the little bit of bump that's happening on the inside. So how do we do that? We need to have two bumps working. So once again, we can use another utility node. So we have the bump over here. This is our, well, let's rename this one really quick. We'll call this one dirt, just so it's very clear. And then over here for the bump, let's do right click, utilities, and bump add. This allows us to add lots of different bumps. You can have as many as you want in here. This is really good for doing industrial materials and, you know, things like this. You can get really creative with it. So the first one, let's just plug it right into the top section and over here. And as you can see, it's just doing what we had previously. Nothing's really changed. And then let's take our texture map here, right click this one, duplicate it. Let's add this into the bump 2 section and see what happens. Right now, nothing is really obvious. If you look in here, there's like a subtle bump occurring around the edges where the mask is highlighted. And I'll just emphasize that more by double clicking this section. And on bump height, let's just pump this up to like a 5. Now you can really see it. So imagine, you know, if we wanted to do another material, which is something that was eating away at the metal like acid, you'd be able to get a really nice bump doing that. But we want this actually looking like it's coming off the surface. So let's change this bump height to a -5. And then now you can see it's sitting on top of the metal. This is probably going to be a little bit too strong, but let's zoom out and see what it looks like. From here, I think it actually reads kind of nice. You know, you can see the edges over here popping. Maybe just a little bit too strong, so I'll probably bring it down just a tiny bit, but it is working pretty well. And this is nice because we have the orange rust here, and then we have the dirt that's sitting on top of the rust. I'm going to try and see if I can find a nice section where the dirt is sitting really obviously on top of the rust. Okay, here we go. This is a nice section where we have some dirt that's sitting here. So I'm going to pull up our material editor one more time because I want to show something that's important for you guys to understand. Let's click this button again just to get this reorganized. Label 1, label 2. The way that things work in Keyshot is label 1 means it's the highest material on the stack. Label 2, second highest, and then the base is metal. So think of this almost, you know, like if you had a blanket, that would be label 1, and if the blanket's on top of metal, you would never see the metal at all. But if the blanket was underneath the metal, meaning that metal was actually label 1 and the blanket was here, then you would see the metal. So just to really illustrate this, let's go ahead and disconnect our two different dirt and rust materials. Let's say remove. Now you can see that the dirt chunk disappeared, and remove. Now you can see that the rust disappeared. So this time I'm going to first add the rust in here as label 1. Sorry, not the rust, the dirt. So you can see the dirt that's building up here. And then now let's do the rust. So what happens now is the rust is actually sitting on top of the dirt, so that kills our dirt. So the way I like to think about this is the rust becomes almost part of this metal, and it always needs to be just on top of the metal surface. And then dirt, something else that might happen, like when, imagine this is a pendant that's worn by a warrior and he's charging through battle and there's mud flying up and that falls on top. That's where the dirt then needs to be on top. So that's why it's really important to understand how the layering works here. So let's just disable these again and remove them. And this time let's put the rest in first. And then now we're going to reconnect the dirt, and dirt will now become label 1. And then now the dirt sits nicely on top of here. Just really important to understand that so you can figure out how to do proper stacking. And I think that's mostly it. Let's go ahead and take a look and see how this is working on both sides. I'm just going to close this for a minute. And actually, I'm going to probably save this as well. Sorry if there was a loud noise in the background. I think a car was backfiring or something. So I just saved this as Keyshot Demo B. I meant to do it as C. That's all right. The other thing I'm going to do too is under Metal Amulet Demo. I'm going to right click that, save to library. Okay, do I want to overwrite it? Yes, I do. And looking again at our Amulet Demo thing, now our material is this nice layered material. I want to see what this looks like on the front and back, just so you guys get a good look at how this is starting to come together. So within our scene, let's go ahead and duplicate this. Let's go right click and here we go, duplicate. And then you can see that we have this transform panel come up. I'm just going to take this and move this over. And then I'm also going to click on, I believe it's rotation here. There we go. And now we have both of these in the scene. And let's just let that render a second and see how it turns out. Okay, so that was letting it render for about a minute long. We could keep on letting it render and it would get even more and more detailed, but we have a nice looking object here already with all this rust and dirt and everything on top. So I think the only thing left to do now is to start working on the gemstone that's in here. Before we do that, let's just take a kind of closer look at some of the cool things that are going on with the pendant. Again, you can see those nice highlights that are coming from the edge highlights we put on the metal underneath, the rust working together, and then even that dirt that's bumping on top. So the way I always do CG is it's always nice to combine a lot of different materials together and add a lot of little subtle things in there, because the more stuff that you have within reason will break up that really CG feel to things so that it really feels like something that would be existing in the real world. In the next chapter, I will show an alternate method for mixing between materials using Keyshot's curvature node. For those of you, such as 3D concept artists who don't have time for creating UVs, the next chapter is going to be extremely useful for saving time. This tutorial and its downloadable content is available now on my QBrush, Gumroad, and Steam stores, which are linked in the description below. Watch the following video to see what is included with your purchase. If you purchase this tutorial, here is a preview of all the bonus content you will receive. Firstly, in ZBrush, I've included 3 different versions of the Amulet. 1, my final sculpted version with all the ornamentational details and destruction. 2, just the sculptural details like ornamentation. 3, a version without anything so you could follow along and create your own during the process. Secondly, you will receive the final Keyshot file demonstrated here, which contains all of the texture maps, lighting, and everything that is shown during the tutorial. The thing that I find really useful about this is having access to the material graph and seeing the complex custom materials that are created during the tutorial. This will really help you with understanding how to create your own complex materials in Keyshot. Next, you will receive all of the final Psd files showcased throughout the tutorial, including this gold-painted Mount Fuji design with all of my different layering processes, as well as the custom crest base that is used later for sculpting in ZBrush based off of masks. Also, you'll get all of the final texture maps that are showcased during the tutorial, such as these, which are all tileable. You will also receive all of the original videos in downloaded format at their full high definition resolution. Also, I have included dozens of high quality personal art images such as my Dark Souls 3 High Lord of Walnor fan art, which inspired me to create the Amulet tutorial to showcase the techniques I learned and developed during the process. Whether you purchase this tutorial or follow along for free on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for your continued support, and I cannot wait to see the epic amulets you create soon.